Which of these free agent running backs is going to be a league winner in 2026? That and so much more on today's episode of the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show. Jeff, we did our quarterback preview last week. We're doing running backs this week, wide receivers next week, and tight ends the week after. But we are kind of looking at some of the guys who are going to be free agents, some guys who might be released, and the fallout from some of these big moves. Now, I think the guys we want to talk about first are the big four, if you will, the guys who are on rookie contracts coming to an end. And let's start first with Travis Etienne. Jeff, where do you think Travis Etienne is going to be playing football in 2026?
I think he's going to be a Jacksonville Jaguar, to be honest with you. I think that there's some leadership involved there. I think that they are going to retain his talents and keep him as the lead back in that backfield.
Sometimes it's just that simple. How long have Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne played football together, Jeff?
Oh, gosh.
Been a long time, right?
It's probably been close to 10 years now at this. I mean, definitely 7 or so years at this point.
And I think that is like there is comfort there. Like, even if Travis Etienne hasn't really, I don't want to like slight his career or anything like that, but probably hasn't lived up to what they imagined he'd be when he was drafted in round 1. But he has been serviceable. He has been reliable. He is a great check down option with Trevor Lawrence. And I can't help but think that having a good friend, a reliable pass catcher that is beside you in the backfield on almost every play has helped his development, helped his comfort a little bit. So this is one where I think there's going to be a lot of speculation about Travis Etienne, but I'm 100% with you. I'd be shocked if he wasn't a Jacksonville Jaguar next season. So the next question I have then, what does that mean for Breece Hall and LaQuint Allen and all of these rookies that we are so excited about?
That's why you're the true professional here, because I was just going to launch into you should be still roster and still even target if the value's right on Breece Hall on LaQuint Allen, because we don't know where he's going to end up. We can speculate that we do think he will end up staying in Jacksonville because of the potential value he brings, the relationship with Lawrence, the way that he really took to the offense this year. But at the same time, they've been pretty non-committal to him when it comes to giving the opportunity of calling him a leader, things like that on the team. It's kind of, they've stopped short of going all the way there. And I think that his attitude at first kind of seems like it wasn't right in the right place, and then it seemed like he got there as the summer went along and into the season. And obviously they moved out Tank Bigsby to open up even that backfield even more. We've seen in spurts, we've seen Tootin look explosive. We've seen Allen be able to handle the passing down duties and suggest a potential valuable role there. So we've seen it in spurts, but they easily could go that direction. They could just make these guys the backs there. But like I said, we started off with the expectation of thinking that Etienne will stay. If he does stay, then you're just looking at a handcuff at that point.
And handcuffs are still valuable in Dynasty. And we see this all the time, too, that these guys that we perceive to be handcuffs, then suddenly an injury happens and then they're in a bigger role. And as we're talking about this through a Dynasty lens, there's no position more volatile than running backs. Short-term contracts, these guys get injured frequently. We see workload shifting all the time. So we always say, like, the mantra in Dynasty, just bet on talent. But when it comes to running backs, this is the position where if you just consistently bet on talent, it's only a matter of time before that opportunity arises. So yeah, this could damper immediate expectation for Breece Hall, but this is still a guy who, just missed day 3 or day 2 draft capital, has the speed we want to see, the athleticism, the explosiveness, all of those things. So still a good long-term bet to make. Now let's keep working our way down this list. The guys who are coming off of their rookie contracts. Breece Hall. Do you think Breece Hall hits the market as an unrestricted free agent? There's also been some murmurs that he potentially could be getting franchise tagged by the New York Jets. What are your thoughts and expectations here for Breece Hall going into 2026?
My gut leans towards being franchised. I think that I think he would love to hit the open market. I think that it would probably be best for him to hit the open market. I do tend to believe that when you look at the Jets, you look at where their money is sitting, they don't really have any real money invested in anybody outside of Garrett Wilson. I mean, they're going to probably a total reset at the quarterback position. I tend to think they're going to franchise Breece Hall, but there have definitely been feelers out there. I mean, he was borderline traded at the trade deadline, just got just short of that. Easily could see him moving on to a new direction. I do think they're going to franchise him.
And what do you think about the transition tag, which we see every now and then, where it kind of allows players to go out and test the market a little bit, and then the Jets can make the decision. Do you think they might go that route and hope to get some compensation in return? Or do you think this is just, hey, $14.1 million, that's the franchise tag this year? To me, it seems very short sighted to pay that much money to a running back, even if it is just on a 1 year deal. This team has so many glaring needs right now. I understand you want a guy that's a fan favorite, a guy that can score from anywhere on the field, but we know all the time that like a running back is not a finishing piece. And this team is so far from contending right now that to me, I struggle to see why they would do that. But at the same time, we know that NFL teams, especially teams that have meddling owners like Woody Johnson, don't always make the right choices here. So I think you probably could be right, but maybe this is just me wish casting that Breece Hall hits the free agent market, because I don't want to see him in a Jets uniform anymore. We have seen them not utilizing him to his best strengths. He has never really been on a good offense. We've seen these flashes year after year after year, but I would just love to see Breece Hall in an offense that could help elevate him to being that top three, that top five fantasy running back we know he can be.
Yeah, it does. I hear you. And I think for fantasy, we all would like that. All would like to see him in a new opportunity, somewhere that's going to allow him be a 3 down back, somewhere in an explosive offense. I mean, you were to put him in Kansas City or with the Commanders potentially with a healthy Daniels there at quarterback. Sure. I mean, you could get there. You talk about cap space and needs. I mean, it's not like there are ample starters just sitting in free agency and like this is the NBA and you can sign superstars if you have the cap space. You can still sign players. That's not going to prevent you from doing anything there. You can still sign players. You can still make moves. At some level, you need to recognize that the base level talent of the Jets offense probably isn't there. If you're going to put a brand new quarterback into that, you're going to say, well, I mean, we can retain Breece Hall here, and we can at least give the number 2 pick, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Adonai Mitchell had flashes, Mason Taylor had flashes. Maybe we add one more piece there to have a passable offensive attack around a brand new rookie with this number 2 pick. Or it's just that I think the argument of saying that there's too many holes, don't utilize the cap space in that direction, doesn't really acknowledge the truth of there's just not really that many good players to utilize cap space on when it comes to addressing holes in your roster. And more often than not, the really good players or the guys with their heads on right, those types of things have all been retained by their own team. And so the guys that hit free agency have some level of question with something that they're doing usually.
Let's talk about another guy who has some level of question in what he is doing. And this, to me, we started off with Travis Etienne and Breece Hall. Exciting players to talk about. But what I really like here, talking about Kenneth Walker, is the potential for what it can potentially open up for Zach Charbonnet, a guy that we have seen in the spot start opportunities can be one of the most valuable players in fantasy football. He's got everything we want to see from fantasy football. He catches passes, he scores touchdowns, he moves the chains, he can handle a big workload. But of course, Kenneth Walker has kind of been the thorn in his side, where we see this 45-55 split that seemingly flips every single week. Jeff, I'm sure you saw, but after all of the offseason and in-season drama about who the better running back was, they finished with exactly the same fantasy output. They got there in very different ways. But what are your expectations here with this one? Do you think that Kenneth Walker is a guy who can hit free agency and go get that big payday? Or do you think that he is also retained by the Seahawks and we just continue to see this frustrating split?
I mean, the Seahawks do have ample cap space, so you play that in, but I think that you're looking at, it's almost counterintuitive because you're looking at two opposite ends here between the Seattle Seahawks being the number 1 team in the NFC and then the Jets being the number 2 team in the NFL draft. And you would think like, well, I mean, the team that's pushing would want to retain the guys. The team that's down at the bottom end would want to reset. You mentioned Charbonnet, and really, I think the complicating factor with Charbonnet is that he is also going to be a free agent very soon. And so that the idea that you're going to sign both of them feels a little bit unrealistic. I mean, maybe you get into a position where you try to keep Walker for a year just to see what that contract negotiation with Charbonnet might look like. But your hand is kind of forced to choose one of these two players here. And I mean, it was dead even this year, so they didn't really tip their hands. I think maybe a little bit in terms of Walker was utilized a little bit more as a feature back when it came down to it, but I think Charbonnet, obviously heavy high value role, give around the goal line, those types of things. And I think he can has shown he can handle most everything thrown his direction. With those two players, you are kind of at the spot where you do use a draft pick or something to bring in another young talent that you have under cost control. You pick the guy that you're going to sign, and then you kind of move off of the other guy. Right now, that timer is up on Kenneth Walker on if he's going to be that selection or not. Again, they do have ample cap space. They have about 69 million in cap space, which currently puts them fourth in the league. I tend to think Walker is a little bit more likely to hit the open market than Breece Hall, just because it's like counterintuitive where you do have the better team, you're pushing to win now, but at the same time, you also have better players, and they're going to be demanding more money in other directions, investing in the offensive line, those types of things, relative to giving that money to Kenneth Walker versus being at the opposite end and just being very depleted. Well, we don't really just want to lose this guy too for nothing.
Yeah, and you talk about Walker being used more as a feature back. I think, he did have those games where it seemed like he'd kind of pull away with it. And we know that so much of Charbonnet's value came through touchdowns, but we also saw Zach Charbonnet miss a game this year. And if you remove Kenneth Walker's usage from that one game and look at what they did over the other 16 games this season, they were within one touch per game of each other this year. I mean, we definitely saw Walker was a little bit more involved as a pass catcher. Zach Charbonnet obviously more involved as a goal line back, but it does seem like they like both of these guys a lot. And there's different types of split backfields, and we've talked about this a lot. You've got the Los Angeles Rams, who are just like, hey, we've got Kyron Williams, and we like what he does in this offense. We're just going to draft a carbon copy in Blake Corum, and then that way we can just interchangeably use these guys on drives. And then you have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, who are so complementary of each other's skill sets, where Kenneth Walker makes the big plays. With that, he also takes the big losses. He's got the one-on-one ability to beat guys in space, but he can't really move a pile. And then you've got Zach Charbonnet, who mitigates losses, keeps the chains moving, scores touchdowns, has that bigger, more physical body, but can also carry the workload when relied on. So I don't know what this is one that, like, if there was one thing that I can kind of take a peek at, this would be up there as like one of my top 5 things that I really want to know how this shakes, along with, where Kyler Murray signs, Aaron Rodgers, some other things out there. But I really don't know what to make of this situation. But this is another one of those where I think Kenneth Walker is a talented back. Zach Charbonnet is a talented back. The worst case scenario is probably that they stay together, where you're getting RB2 value from either of these guys. And the best case scenario is that Kenneth Walker leaves, becomes a featured back somewhere, and Zach Charbonnet is afforded the same ability to do that in Seattle. So I think the actionable spin here would just be to continue acquiring both of these guys, as we have both, recommended doing for years, because they're both good running backs. Now, one more guy we want to talk about in the rookie contracts coming to an end section here. But before we do that, if you're watching the show on YouTube, do us a favor, just like this video. We know it's hard to do with everything that you're watching, but just take the 2 seconds to like this video. If you're not already subscribed, please do that as well. That helps this channel grow. It is Dynasty season. We are trying to grow this channel as best as we can. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast, do us a favor and leave us a podcast review, hopefully 5 stars, but we will take the critical feedback if you've got any of that as well. Now, Jeff, the last guy we want to talk about in this tier, Rashad White. Now, this is one of the most interesting guys to talk about as well, because he's just 2 years removed from being a top 5 fantasy running back. And then we saw Bucky Irving come in, kind of usurp that role from him. Last year, Bucky Irving got hurt. Rashad White stepped into a bigger role. Didn't really retain it, though, as Sean Tucker was able to carve out a bigger role. So Rashad White, when I see this guy, pass catching profile, day 2 draft capital, the size to be a workhorse NFL back, but it just hasn't really happened over the last couple of years. So do you think he's destined to just be one of those rotational pass catching running backs at this point?
Dave, I do want to stop. I want to acknowledge the pro move that you did there of breaking of having this tier, calling it a tier. You called it a tier several times, and grouping 4 running backs here, and having Travis Etienne and Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, these guys that are fantasy all stars, and then throwing Rashad White in there. But the pro move that you did though is you did the call to action before that, and so if you caught that as well, make sure to comment here on that you caught Dave's slick move
giving away all the sneaky moves
to tier Rashad White with these other backs. But but at the same time, Rashad White has been a running back 1 in fantasy football previously. And before the Bucky Irving became the new hotness, we were all very angry about Leonard Fournette taking touches away from Rashad White. He was the guy that we wanted to see get all the touches. And now, I do think that there was a real opportunity in the market for targeting players like Rashad White, and it still probably is an opportunity in the market. I do think that Javonte Williams' success kind of put a pin in that a little bit of because like everybody
Mhm.
in there, what do we take away from last season? And it's Javonte Williams. Turns out that a running back landing on a good team is a good thing for fantasy, and so I think that the dynasty community, from what I've seen so far, is pretty plugged in on Rashad White's potential status as a lead back. That being said, there still could be very good opportunity to go out, target him. As I always talk about when these types of trades of trading, changing the eye line of maybe you're trying to acquire a wide receiver up here and you have Rashad White as a throw in, recognizing the potential value he could add, because we all know if you walk around throwing a third round pick at Rashad White, everybody's going to be, oh, what do you know? You know something. I can't possibly do that. So I think that White is a really good, interesting target. I definitely could see a backfield, an NFL team decide that he can be their lead back because we've seen him be a lead back. He brings a skill set. He can contribute in the passing game, good size, able to contribute around the goal line. So I know the efficiency's never been great for Rashad White, but absolutely
Let
see
me
him as a
let me
guy that
pause you on that real quickly because that was the big knock on Rashad Wright. Remember, like 3 years ago, he was a workhorse back, and he was 139th in rushing EPA among all running backs. 2 years ago, when he starts to lose some touches to Bucky Irving, he's 20th in EPA among running backs. And last year, on an even smaller workload, he's ninth among all running backs. So Jeff, it's almost like the fewer touches you get, the more efficient you can be with them. And when you're getting 350 touches, it's hard to be efficient on them. This is something we talk about all the time, but like that is still, and I'm not saying you specifically, but I think there is just this idea that Rashad White is not an efficient back. He wasn't efficient when he was getting 300 plus touches on a smaller workload over the last couple of years. He's been one of the more efficient rushing backs in the NFL.
Imagine how efficient your run game could be if you just never ran the ball. If you just threw it, kind of like it would be so incredibly efficient to be able to do that. But I mean, you're
Yeah, we
exactly
talk about
right.
it. Jameis Winston one's run route this year, and what does he do with it? 39 yards, two broken tackles, a
Yards per route
touchdown. He's the
run.
greatest receiver ever.
He's number one in yards per route run. I don't see it in acknowledgement that James Winston is number one in yards per route run this year. And I think Caleb
In
Williams ranks
history.
really high in yards per route run as well this year, too.
He does. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He did have that
So, yeah, we
that playoff game. I don't know if he ran a route. That might have really hurt his numbers there, that efficiency and that. I know there was that tight end around pass attempt, but that might have blown up his efficiency a little bit. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about efficiency before. If you're less touches and put in a better opportunity, you're going to be a more efficient back. If you're touching the ball every single time and throwing into a meat grinder, you're going to be a less efficient back. And definitely we saw it flip the other way with Bucky Irving this year, where Bucky Irving was running inside, lots of hard carries, and was injured, missed some time, and his efficiency plummeted relative to when he was able to come in as a rookie and running with fresh legs. But that speaks to another fallacy that I see quite often is that every backfield is a committee now. And it's really, really the exact opposite. We've got more feature backs than I think we have in a long time in the NFL. But if you were to construct a potential committee, Rashad White, I think, could definitely be the lead part of that, or if you, even leaning towards like a straight split. Rashad White, I think, could be very, very valuable there. And for our fantasy purposes, there's a very high upside here of what Rashad White can potentially offer.
I do want to say as well as we're, joking about the negative correlation between efficiency and touches. We did use that a lot this offseason to talk about Jalen Warren. And I just want to note Jalen Warren maintained his efficiency on a much bigger workload this year. So shout out to Jalen Warren for being the kind of outlier in the efficiency
What
usage
did Kenneth Gainwell
corollary.
do with his efficiency? Because I bet it went really up.
Also
So
very good. Also very good. Yeah, I think it might have something to do with just the way these guys are utilized in that offense. But let's keep working our way down the list here, Jeff. And I've got another little group of players. And we'll talk about both of these guys in the same vein because they are both veterans coming off of ruptured Achilles. Both of them happened early in the season. Talking about Najee Harris and Austin Eckler. Both are going to hit the market as free agents. Austin Eckler, a little bit older. He's 30 years old. Najee Harris, 27 years old. I expect there to be somewhat of a market for both of these guys, especially Najee Harris, who went down, was it week 2 or week 3? I forget, early enough in the season that he should be near 100% at the start of the season, will be 28 at the start of the year as well. So we expect that he'll still have some gas in the tank there. For a guy like Austin Eckler, though, going into his age 31 season, it is hard to imagine that a team out there is going to be too thrilled about bringing them back. So I would recommend buying Najee Harris where you can, because I think he has this reputation as being an old, dusty running back. And now, on top of that, coming off the injury, you can just get him for pennies on the dollar. And while I want to use that same logic for a guy like Austin Eckler, I just wonder with his age, his usage, and the market, I don't know if Austin Eckler is going to find a path to fantasy relevance at this point in his career.
Yeah, he did post on social media at the end of the season, kind of a goodbye message to the Commanders at least,
Mhm.
and so there's definitely speculation about, at least when the injury happened, it definitely felt a lot more like we've seen the end of Austin Eckler's fantasy utility, which Austin Eckler, he's been amazing for fantasy football. He's just been amazing person in general, but amazing for fantasy football, not only as a player, but in key part of growing the game and making it more acceptable in some circles. And so we definitely would love to see him be able to land somewhere that he can be a contributor. We can have him on our rosters and be excited for what he can bring. But again, he did post a farewell message, so it does kind of feel like a little bit out there, like exactly like what you said on, are we going to see him step into a role again or not? Najee Harris definitely feels like he's closer to the prime of his career. Definitely people can argue about what that prime means for Najee Harris, but I think that Najee Harris is a good NFL running back, and he should be given the ability to get back to full health. I think it would have been really interesting to see him this year because
Probably the spiciest take we ever have on this show, Jeff, is that Najee Harris, the first round pick, who has just done nothing but rush for 1,000 yards every single year, is a good running back. It's
yeah.
just blasphemous to say in these dynasty circles. But yeah, I think the NFL still values Najee Harris, and I expect to see him play somewhere in 2026.
Well, we talk about efficiency in a part-time role. He definitely was looking very efficient when given opportunities, and he looked more explosive than Omarion Hampton did. And granted, that was very early in Hampton's career. The vision's not necessarily there immediately, whereas you've got Najee Harris as a veteran running back who's able to split the workload more than he ever was able to come in with some fresher legs. And so that did kind of suggest that we could have seen a really interesting outcome to the season in this Chargers backfield. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But again, this is another one of those guys. Can he get healthy? And if he can get healthy, he profiles as a potential lead back in an NFL backfield.
So Greg Roman fired from the Chargers as of today. We talked so much about how Greg Roman likes to split up the backfield, and that's why we had high expectations for Najee Harris, even though Omarion Hampton was drafted this year. Do you think that the Chargers want to retain Najee Harris? Who is going to hit the market as an unrestricted free agent. We talked about this a little bit last week with Daniel Jones, kind of talking about how coming off an injury, it makes sense to just return to the place that you already know, don't have to learn a new playbook. It's a little bit different for running backs, but now we don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. We don't know where Greg Roman is going to be. We also don't know where Mike Tomlin is going to be next year, who might want to call up his old buddy Najee Harris. So this is one I think there's going to be a big market for Najee Harris. I think there's going to be plenty of teams that are going to be interested in bringing him in. And I think it's too hard to even speculate about where he would land, but I think that, if he's able to check the boxes that teams want to see for being healthy going into next season, I'd be shocked if he isn't, in a situation that wants to give him 150, 200, maybe even more than that, 250 plus touches next year.
I mean, not to release the entire episode here, but we are going to end up around 10 to 15 backs that we probably think can be main guys in a backfield. And like the super good guys aren't even free agents here. So like at some level, the value is going to disappear out of this class, or the value is going to grow exponentially out of this free agent class, because there might be too many bodies for the actual amount of musical chairs. I know our Sigmund Bloom on Twitter was talking about how much talent is going to be able to be a free agent. And I mentioned to Sig, it said, well, it's going to be so much talent that even teams that don't think they're in the market absolutely should be in the market, because there's going to be values out there. And so I think Najee Harris is probably going to land more on the value side, coming off of an Achilles injury and coming off of a guy that, I mean, yes, 4,000 yards every year, but at the same time wasn't really carrying the cachet of, I mean, he signed a 1-year deal the first time that he got into free agency, and that was without an Achilles injury. So I think that Najee Harris is the type of player that could end up as a backup to like James Cook in Buffalo or something like that, where let him get healthy, let him reset, and then maybe he comes in and injury allows for it or opportunity allows for it, and he does do something to rebound his value. But right now, to project him off of an Achilles in anywhere close to week 1 to be leading a backfield, not quite there yet.
So let's talk about this next year, Jeff. And funny, almost all of these guys this year ended up on new teams and all found different versions of success. The one guy that is in this tier, let's just start with Jerome Ford, the guy who wasn't on a new team this year. Probably should have been in the young players on expiring rookie deals, but Jerome Ford isn't really to the level of talent of some of those other guys that we opened up to talk about at the top of the show. So let's talk about Jerome Ford here. Was drafted a little bit older, so he kind of feels like more of a veteran than he does like a young guy getting to test the market. Do you think this is a guy who just gets retained by the Browns, or maybe, now with this late season injury to Quinshon Judkins, they want to bring back somebody who's familiar with the system, but there's so many moving parts in Cleveland right now with Stefanski gone and, Dylan Sampson showing some signs of life last year, Quinshon Judkins looking great when he was healthy. I'd be shocked if a new coaching staff comes in and wants to retain Jerome Ford. So I'd expect him to hit the free agent market, but have we seen enough from Jerome Ford that we can even get excited about him at this point?
Well, I was waiting for you to do call to action before we talked about Jerome Ford, because I mean, and you bring up a really good point there on speculating about potential landing spots and things like that. I wanted to do my first cut of a mock draft, and I looked at it, and at the time when I started to think about it, the Titans were holding the number 1 pick, and I was like, geez, they don't even have a coach. Like, what are they going to do with the number 1 pick? Now the Raiders have the number 1 pick. They don't have a coach. And so like the idea, sure, we can do Fernando Mendoza, but the idea of like assigning players to rosters that don't even have a coach or a GM in some instances,
which is like half of the league right now, it seems like.
Very frivolous, I feel like, when it comes to off-season potential exercises. We'll have a lot of time to unpack when they actually have. So in terms of, I don't think the Browns, their GM, Andrew Berry, unless he's been fired and I missed it because everybody's been fired and I might have missed it. We just got back from Vegas, folks, in our retreat. And so, we're doing our very best here. But so Andrew Berry's still there. I don't think Berry assigns any real level of value to the running back position. And so I think that they're perfectly happy to go with the rookies, go with Dylan Sampson, go with Quinshon Judkins as the backs. I know that they basically asked Jerome Ford to take a pay cut to stay on the team like last summer. And so that doesn't really endear you. And while he was playing snaps, he was basically the veteran equivalent of LaQuint Allen in the Browns backfield, right, where you only realized he was playing snaps if you actually are a maniac like me and Dave and dug into the actual usage week to week. There wasn't anything to suggest that Jerome Ford should be fantasy relevant, or I think that ship has probably sailed. That being said, you guys end up places and they turn into spot starts. I don't think anybody's playing in their backfield around Jerome Ford, though.
Speaking of guys ending up in situations and becoming starters, Javonte Williams signed a 1-year deal with the Dallas Cowboys. He is now going to hit the free agent market. And Jeff, I wrote a whole article about somewhere in the mid-season, I don't know, week 8, week 9, week 10, about how Javonte Williams was just my biggest miss this year. Didn't draft him on a single roster. I just bought into the narrative that, he blew his knee out. That was the end of his career. He was never going to bounce back. Well, he looked fantastic this year. And a lot of that was volume based, but we still saw some juice. We saw the tackle breaking abilities. We saw the pass catching, the things that we liked about Javonte Williams when he was a rookie and early in year 2 in Denver. Then he hits the free agent market, signs with the Dallas Cowboys, a good team that needed a running back. There was so much talk about Jaden Blue and Phil Maffa and Miles Sanders that Javonte Williams was kind of the forgotten guy in this backfield, emerged as the clear-cut top dog there and finished as a fantasy RB1. To me, it would make a lot of sense for Dallas to bring him back, but at the same point, we saw this team miss the playoffs. We saw Javonte Williams wear down a little bit at the end of the season. And since that Zeke contract, Jerry Jones I don't know if he's ever going to offer a big contract to a running back ever again. So, well, it makes sense for the Cowboys to retain him. It also wouldn't surprise me at all if Jerry Jones just continues down this running backs don't matter road and brings in some other guy off the street for $1.3 million and figures it out.
I really think we are in an age where you've got the Saquon Barkleys and the Christian McCaffreys, and like we'll put James Cook there, and like we'll spend money on those guys, and then we're not spending money on anybody else. And so I think that I see Javonte Williams remaining in Dallas because I don't think there's going to be a very robust market for him in free agency. I think it's the type of thing where, maybe somewhere might give him a little bit more, but at some level he's going to say, hey, I can be the lead back here. I like this offense. This was really worked well for me. You mentioned your biggest miss. If I just had deleted fantasy Twitter through the month of August, I would have had Javonte Williams on every single team. I was high on him at the beginning of the summer, and I allowed the intriguing mystery box rookie talk of Jaden Blue and other things to cloud my vision on Javonte Williams. Eventually ended up kind of pulling more to neutral in my projections and was not where I wanted to be on Javonte Williams. But we do see that. But like I said, I think that outside of having the Saquon Barkleys, or a couple of years ago when we had Saquon and we had Josh Jacobs in free agency, and then those are some true headliners, I think Javonte Williams is kind of the leader of that next level, especially of the available guys, but that leader of that level of a team being comfortable and giving them significant money over a 3 or 4 year span. It kind of more falls into, here's $5 million, $4 million, and you'll be our starter, or we'll do that for over 10 years or something like that. I just don't think that there's going to be this massive payday out there to lure him away from Dallas.
And I think you could be right there. And I think so much of it too, like we get so clouded by the early season bias where Javonte Williams was just like consistently giving us great production and looked like a true RB1, but he did wear down at the end of the season. And that's something that Matt Waldman and I talked about this recently on an episode of the Launchpad. And it's something that you can just see with your own eyes, that a lot of times these guys who have dealt with injuries start the season hot and they can do that. And then as the aches and pains from that injury start to settle in over the course of the year, the wear and tear from playing through that injury, then you start to see them lose some of their juice. And I think of like Cam Akers when he came back from that Achilles injury. Like his first game back, it was like, wow, Cam Akers looks awesome. And then his second game back, it was like, oh, he doesn't look so awesome anymore. Just getting out there and actually playing games on an injured joint or ligament or whatever it can be. I think it's a lot harder as the season progresses, but let's keep working our way down the list. And I think the next guy we can talk about, it seems like these two guys always kind of go hand in hand. Like you can't talk about Javonte Williams without also bringing up J.K. Dobbins, another guy who suffered a catastrophic injury early in his career. The difference is J.K. Dobbins has had one bad injury that he has been able to recover from. J.K. Dobbins, just every single season seems to go down with something. It's a knee injury or an Achilles. It's just year after year after year, he's picking something up. And sure enough, his 2025 season also ended with a season-ending injury. This one wasn't quite as bad. We don't think it was an Achilles. They were kind of hush-hush about it, but it seems like it was a Lisfranc injury, which hopefully he can recover from. But Jeff, at a certain point, you got to look at the injury history for J.K. Dobbins. I'm sure he's going to get a 1-year prove-it deal from somebody out there. When he's active, when he's healthy, he looks fantastic, but this guy just gets bit by the injury bug every single year, and I can't imagine teams are going to ignore that.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, his injury was a screwy one because he finished the game, and then it was like one of those things of he finished the game, and then it was kind of like some reports of, hey, he picked up a little bit of an injury in this, and then it was like 2 days later,
And then he went to
season-ending
Twitter and
IR.
was like,
Like it was,
yeah.
it was kind of one of those types of things. So yeah, definitely, it wasn't like we saw. I mean, the unfortunate injury with George Kittle on Sunday, where everybody could see what happened there. There's nothing like that with Dobbins. It was kind of a little bit of he finished the game, and then, oh, by the way, he picked something up late, and oh, by the way, now his season's over. But he does kind of prove out the J.K. Dobbins or the Javonte Williams talk of this second tier. We saw him sit out in the market forever last summer, and it was because, I mean, maybe it was because he had a hush-hush, wink-wink deal with Denver, and kind of there was some potential compensation for the Chargers involved in that, or maybe it was just because no team wanted to give him the reins to their backfield, essentially. I think on talent alone, and even when he's available, J.K. Dobbins is probably pushing to be in the top 15 running backs conversation when you really look at it. But given all the injuries and given the most valuable ability is availability of it with J.K. Dobbins, and the lack of availability knocks him down a peg, and it puts him in a position where no team wants to invest long term for sure there. And even in the short term, might be a little bit iffy. My expectation would be that he remains with Denver. I think they value him highly. I think he feels good about them valuing him last summer and giving him a shot to come in. And I think he's going to push RJ Harvey to be the starting running back there.
So you think, and I tend to agree with you. You think that he's going to return to Denver this year, and I think that just makes the most sense because he looked so good in this offense behind that offensive line, and we like RJ Harvey. You know, he's got the explosive upside that we love to see from a young player. But you know, we saw RJ Harvey had 3/4 of a season to beat out J.K. Dobbins, and he couldn't do it. Like to me, it very much so seems like J.K. Dobbins is the preferred Sean Payton back.
Yeah, and I think that you look at Dobbins, we'll talk about Rico Dowdle, we talk about Javonte Williams. You look at these backs that, like, especially that guy like Javonte Williams and even Dobbins to some extent, of they had to wonder if they're going to get the opportunity again in their career to be a lead back. And so then they do get that opportunity, and they are just running with house money, running with their hair on fire to start the season. Whereas somebody that maybe is a little bit more established, maybe a little bit more comfortable in their role might understand, or teams that might be a little bit more intentional with a back's usage in some windows. I remember last year, Josh Jacobs in like week 2 or 3 had that game where it was like 35 carries. And then Matt LaFleur basically said, well, that was an accident. And if we do that again, we're going to kill this guy. So we're not going to do that again. We're going to make sure that we manage his workload a little bit more. I think some of these guys get into an opportunity where they didn't think they would be in that opportunity. So they're going with it. They're running hard with it. And then, you know, maybe the dings pick up, or maybe it's just that the body's not built to do that time after time after time, and they tend to slow down a little bit. And I mean, the Cowboys really didn't have anybody that they were able to shift. Malik Davis looked decent in spurts, but Jaden Blue couldn't even get on the game day active roster. And then Miles Sanders, his season was
Couldn't
over
get off the
before it
coach's
started.
naughty
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, I mean, he gets one opportunity and he wears cleats that give him blisters like that day, and it was like, forget about this guy. And then we saw Phil Moff at the end of the year finally clear, but he didn't really do much. That's where having that back there, and Denver did have a little bit more with Dobbins. I mean, Dobbins did have some of those games where the carries crept up a little bit, but we know RJ Harvey, Tyler Batty, playing some of these other guys, Leo McLaughlin occasionally, to try to be more intentional with Dobbins. Injuries happen too frequently to J.K. Dobbins.
Don't forget about Adam Prentice, who just got like one target, just like in ink every single game. Like they couldn't get out of a game without giving at least one target to Adam Prentice as well. But that's just the Sean Payton mentality. No, let's talk about the next guy here, Jeff. Rico Dowdle. You know it because you're a smart guy, Jeff, and you pay attention to this stuff. But I think a lot of the listeners will be shocked to hear that Rico Dowdle is going to his age 28 season. You know, this guy spent a long time on the practice squad in Dallas before he ever got called up, and then had his big breakout year there, and then went over to Carolina. And I think because he's just kind of been on the fantasy radar for the last 2 years, people think he's this young guy, but already going into his age 28 season. So an aged veteran at this point. We saw 2 phenomenal games this year. And I think one of those was against a Miami team. I know one of those was against a Miami team where, you know, they were just checked out at the midway point of this season. And shout out to Mike McDaniel for getting him back on track late in the year. Couldn't save him his job, but this was a team that just seemingly kind of quit midseason. And that was when Rico Dowdle was able to run all over him. And then next week, coming off of a hot game, feeling himself, he has the revenge game against Dallas where he made it very known that he wanted to run all over those guys, and he did it again. Outside of those 2 games, though, we saw the efficiency really fall off of a cliff. There are times, I mean, just as early as last week when we look at that wild card game, where I would say Chuba Hubbard looked like the better running back. So we saw this like short little 2-game stretch where Rico Dowdle just dominated 2 bad defenses. Outside of that, it was pretty lackluster. He was able to make up his fantasy production with touchdowns, and we like that. There was a lot of volume as well, but I don't know what type of market there's going to be for Rico Dowdle. Maybe it's just like the run style and the hair and the body type, but I got burned bad by holding on to my Dante Foreman bags when he had a couple of nice flashes over a 2 year career and then never really did much after that. And I can't help but feel like Rico Dowdle is trending in a similar direction.
I think that over the course of dynasty time, that if you do have opportunities with a player like Rico Dowdle, who ideally you got for nothing, you got him for absolutely free not this past summer, the summer before, if you're paying attention to tea leaves, those types of things, more often than not, if you're able to move off of them and get value, and by value I mean probably a second round pick or better in opportunities, you probably end up doing pretty good over the long run. If you kind of have that approach of every single time that one of these guys comes from out of nowhere later in their career, steps into a starter type role and really flashes. It is fascinating to me because the way he had those 2 games, and it makes me wonder of like, could like James Cook, if you like 35 carries, like any given game, go for 200 plus yards against literally anybody. And it's just because of the way that the coaches want to manage the workloads, and just fell into those 2 games with Chuba Hubbard out of the lineup and the Panthers looking for answers on their own and leaning into the run game a little bit more. And then Dowdle kind of just runs himself out. And there's a reason why you don't see Christian McCaffrey get 35 touches every single game, because nobody can hold up to that. But I think that when you look at him, you're seeing, I mean, the argument is there. He's proven it out 2 years now in a row where he can be a lead back in a backfield, whether it needs to be a committee backfield, whether it needs to be supporting elements there, whether it needs to be a high-end offense. Those might be legitimate questions. I don't know, at 28 and kind of not having the blue chip profile that some of the other players might have that we've already talked about, that kind of also contributes to putting him to a little bit of iffy territory. But definitely an intriguing option should he hit the market, and especially if he lands in the correct spot.
Yeah, and I think he's one of those guys, like, we saw that he came in midseason, and there's also the fresh legs argument, right? Like when a guy comes in midseason when everybody's kind of banged up, feeling the wear and tear of the season, and Rico Dowdle did not have much work at all at that point in the year, so he's able to come with fresh legs and just kind of run through the defense. I think he is more destined for a backup. I keep going back to Donta Foreman for whatever reason, and like, Donta Foreman had some flashes where he looked great, like whether it was with Tennessee, whether it was with Carolina, even like he had these flashes where he looked really good, but just feels more like a backup than he does a guy who is going to fall into a major workload. But let's stick with some of these guys, these youngish veterans. I kind of drew the line like if under the age of 29 going into next year, and I think one of the most surprising guys from this season, Jeff, and it all came late in the year, Kenneth Gainwell, just as the season progressed, just kept getting more and more involved, ended up finishing the regular season as the reception leader for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I can go 2 ways here. I've always been a Gainwell fan. I think that he is a good running back. Now, a lot of what he does well doesn't show up in the stat sheet. He's great at pass blocking. He is a patient runner. He is a good pass catcher. So I do get excited about that. But then there's the other path where I just say, this to me, remember Najee Harris's rookie season when he was just playing with a noodle armed Ben Roethlisberger and just gobbling up targets because they couldn't push the ball downfield? How much of Kenneth Gainwell's season came because Aaron Rodgers just didn't want to push the ball downfield?
Yeah, I think that had they had a wide receiver that can run a wide receiver screen, then Gainwell's targets probably would have been cut in about half. They didn't have that element, and they basically had to invent that element that Rodgers really has had to rely on. He relied on that, to be fair, throughout his prime as well. He would always hit that Devontae Adams. If the look was there, always hit that wide receiver screen to Devontae Adams, and it was kind of
Forget Aaron
Gainwell.
Jones.
Yeah, Gainwell ended up being kind of the equivalent of that this year for the Steelers. I mean, definitely struggle targets when it comes down to Gainwell, but what he was able to do was very impressive. I know week to week, charting the backfield usage for my backfield breakdown article, it would end up being the players that were, it would be like Bijan Robinson, Devin Achane, and Kenneth Gainwell, and Christian McCaffrey. We're like the only ones that have done these, like, this many games with 6 receptions or something like that. And like over and over again, I would run into that. And so definitely a great statistical season, especially in the passing game. He's a little bit younger, I think, than maybe people realize. At least I was a little bit surprised because he's 26. And so you kind of look at him, thinking about him as a guy that's been around forever, been around for a long time, but he's only 26. So he's definitely got a window of productivity. But we know that probably is going to be very offensive dependent because we've seen other players. We saw Jerick McKinnon was running back with like 2 over the second half of the season a couple of years ago and then disappeared immediately. We
I
do
mean, Amir
tend to
Abdullah
see
was an
these.
RB1 down the stretch
Yeah.
last year. Like it happens where these guys just get hot at the right time, but I don't want to take that away from Kenneth Gainwell because I
No.
do think he's a good
Yeah.
running back. I remember you remember the preseason game where Anthony Richardson got blown up and broke his pinky, and there was so much talk about like what was supposed to happen on that play. You know, was the running back supposed to chip on the block? I forget who was the Colts rookie running back that was in on that snap. Like there was
DJ
so much
good
discussion.
DJ
Yes, DJ
Giddens.
Giddens.
Yeah.
Yes, DJ Giddens, and there was so much talk about, like, what the running back was supposed to do, so me, being the nerd that I am, being in the preseason, I went back and I started watching film of Shane Steichen's offense from when he was in Philadelphia to see what the running back's responsibilities were. I remember coming back after watching all of this and just saying, like, Kenneth Gainwell is a very good pass blocker, and you and I talked about that in the preseason, saying that, like, an immobile Aaron Rodgers at 42 years old is going or 40 years old, whatever he is, we said like he is going to need a pass blocking running back. That's what Gainwell does really well. So, yes, this is a guy who looked very good this year, is a very versatile back, can do the things that don't show up in the stat sheet. And as you mentioned, is still just 26 years old. This to me, like, I don't think he's going to continue being a top six running back like he was over the second half of the season. But I do think Kenneth Gainwell did enough good things this year that he can command a contract somewhere and find himself in a fantasy relevant role again in 2026.
I mean, I would be a lot less angry if Kenneth Gainwell were doing the things that Ty Johnson is doing for the Bills. I'll just say that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about one more guy here, Jeff. Another guy who is young-ish, you know, not old by any means, but you know, getting up there a little bit. Brian Robinson Jr. People drafted him a ton because they expected Christian McCaffrey to miss time. And wouldn't you know it, you know, coming off the year where Christian McCaffrey couldn't get on the field, everybody was scared to draft him. And then he plays a full season. We don't see much of Brian Robinson Jr. at all. But I do have to say, Brian Robinson Jr., on the limited touches that he got in San Francisco this year, looked better than the running back I saw in Washington. Now, a lot of that comes from the benefit of playing behind Trent Williams and the rest of that San Francisco offensive line. But the big problem that he had in Washington, at least what we heard from beat reporters, was that he wasn't running with enough aggression, that he wasn't getting downhill quick enough. And that didn't seem to be an issue in San Francisco. So do you think that he put enough good things on tape this season that he'll command some sort of buzz this offseason around the league?
Yeah, I mean, he was drafted a lot because he was drafted and people thought he was a starting running back for the Commanders, and then he got
Right.
traded. But I do agree with you. I saw similar things when he was given opportunity. He did look much more explosive and decisive than he did previously. I mean, some of that might be the coaching. Some of the, you know, being with one of the most advanced offensive minds in Kyle Shanahan and having a clear directive of what you're supposed to do when you have the play allows you to play a lot quicker. But that
Also,
being
maybe
said,
just like a slap of
yeah,
reality, you know?
yeah,
Maybe that was it. Like, hey, you know, I could just coast through. You know, my job is safe here in Washington.
yep,
And then he gets traded for pennies, and he's like, "Oh, I need to step up." And some
yeah.
people are just going to crumble under that pressure, and some people are going to step up to the challenge. And I think that's what Brian Robinson did this year.
You're exactly right. And that's a great point, and I'm glad you went there. And I do think that some team, he's at minimum shown himself to be a very capable running back two that could probably work in a committee as the lead down type of a back in a committee. I think that's definitely in play. And I think he's a really good, interesting player to watch under the radar here of where he ends up, because he is a guy that I could see him being fantasy relevant.
Let's talk about the next group here, Jeff. And these are guys that are free agents. Their days in fantasy are probably numbered, if not over at this point, but they're going to sign somewhere and do just enough to just muck up projections for us and make it difficult to get a read on these backfields. Let's just lump all of these guys together: Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, and Miles Sanders. These are all aged running backs, but they're all running backs who have really shown that they can be very good running backs at certain points in their career. And while they don't still have the juice that they previously did, these are still good running backs that are probably going to sign somewhere and just take, you know, 8 to 10 touches a game, just enough to dampen any excitement we have about an incoming rookie or another free agent that's signed somewhere else. So, what are we doing with these guys in fantasy? I can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure Kareem Hunt is still rostered in some leagues because he was, you know, viable this year. Nick Chubb, people don't want to cut him just because he's Nick Chubb. Miles Sanders probably stashed on IR spots. So, are these guys still worth holding on to at this point? Or are these just the guys that we're going to inevitably end up cutting after our rookie drafts to make room on our rosters?
Well, As of right now, I would say don't proactively cut them because we haven't had free agency yet. And like you mentioned, we haven't had rookie drafts yet. So you don't really need that roster space right now. So don't preemptively cut them. I mean, I'd be willing to let go of Miles Sanders. I just don't think it's going to be there for Miles Sanders. I don't think it's going to be there for Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt either. It falls into a weird territory where you want to have your rosters loaded with running backs, and especially running backs that have potential pass to relevance. But you look at both of these guys, and they both kind of land in they need a touchdown to hit your roster. And the idea that they're going to rush for 100 yards in a game feels pretty farcical at this point, but they absolutely could get in position to get a touchdown. And Kareem Hunt is like the poster child for the argument of, yes, sure, there can be some utility here, but also it is going to be a very low ceiling. So, like, what do you want to marry yourself into? What do you want to use your roster space on? Or because you're not going to be able to get anything for these guys, but at the same
Right.
time, I think that there's going to be a lot, especially once we get through rookie drafts, there's going to be a lot of guys that aren't worth rostering that these guys both could be worth rostering. I think the concerning element would be we've seen them in situations where Hunt, for sure, we've seen him be in a situation where he had full control of the backfield because Isaiah Pacheco was out. They didn't feel comfortable going to Rashad Smith. It was in a Patrick Mahomes offense. It was not a terrible offense, and he wasn't very relevant. And it does kind of defeat the argument that all a running back needs is opportunity, and he'll be very fantasy relevant. Chubb, we saw him little bit of an opportunity. I guess I don't know that he was. I think he was hurt still. The Jawar Jordan game, I believe he was still injured there, but
Yeah,
we just
he was.
haven't seen like spurts where maybe he gets to 50 yards at a touchdown. Not going to be involved in the passing game. It's deepest
His
leagues
biggest play of the
basically.
year came on a play that Todd Bowles said they allowed him to score on. Like, that
Yes.
was the best game he had in the fantasy season. It was funny. They asked Todd Bowles about it after the game, and he just kind of smirked a little bit and was like, we needed to get the ball back there. And like that's pretty much where Nick Chubb is at. If the defense, all 11 guys on the field are going to decide that they're going to let Nick Chubb score a touchdown, he could make your day in fantasy, but
Yeah.
those situations don't come around often. So Jeff, I'm going to rattle off 12 names here. These are some other pending free agents. I'm just going to rapid fire list all these guys. We don't need to talk about every single one of them. Let me know which of these 12 guys you think could still end up maybe being on the Dynasty radar next year. Dare Gumbawale, Raheem Mostert, Amir Abdullah, Jeremy McNichols, Travis Homer, Alexander Madison, AJ Dillon, Chase Edmonds, Khalil Herbert, Dearness Johnson, Michael Carter, and Zamir White. That's funny. These guys were all somewhat fantasy relevant over the last year to 3 years at one point. Do you think that their days are behind them, or do you think that you can potentially see one of these guys end up in a situation where we're talking about him in Dynasty again?
No, I don't think any of them are. But at the same time, Michael Carter is like, I mean, I don't want to say Michael Carter is like a cockroach, but at the same time, Michael Carter is going to find himself in 3 or 4 games with the Cardinals where he ends up being the running back 15 on the week because that's what Michael Carter does with the Cardinals, it seems like. Otherwise, I mean,
He did it with the Jets too. He's just one of those guys, like, if you sign him to your practice squad, you are just guaranteeing that your starter is going to get hurt.
and so when I suggest that I don't want to call him a cockroach, I'm just saying that he finds a way to survive. Carter
Yes.
finds a way to survive. I think Bam Knight is a free agent potentially. I think that's an interesting one. You didn't mention
I didn't
Tyler
go all of it.
Algier. That I
I
think
did
Tyler
not.
Algier is worth talking about. Why don't we talk about Tyler Algier instead of the 12 backs that nobody wants to hear us talk about?
That is honestly, Jeff, that is just a miss on my part. And I am so happy to have a good co host like you that can recognize those things without even need to looking into it. Like, yeah, he should have been in the interesting youngish guys that we were talking about earlier alongside Javonte Williams and J.K. Dobbins and Rico Dowdle. Shame on me for missing Tyler Algier, but that's who we should be talking about here. Talk to me about Tyler Algier because this is a guy who, as a rookie, rushed for 1,000 yards and then was replaced by Bijan Robinson, but has still looked good in minimal opportunities since.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting because the Falcons throughout the summer, everything, they have continually called Tyler Allgeier a starting running back in the NFL. They have acknowledged that they have no chance of re-signing him, that he's going to get a much bigger offer. I think that around the league, he should be, I believe, an aggressive dynasty target, because just the way the Falcons are talking. But I think in general, I think teams are sharp enough to say, hey, like this guy, the only reason why he wasn't among the top 5 to 10 leaders in rushing yards over the last 3 years is because they went out and drafted Bijan Robinson. They drafted the best running back in the NFL and basically relegated Allgeier here. I know Allgeier ends up being a frustrating point in fantasy because his presence means that it's not Bijan Robinson's presence. But I think that as you get into the market, teams will see an opportunity to say, it almost reminds me a little bit of Michael Turner in San Diego with the Chargers when they had LaDainian Tomlinson, and everybody was like, we know Michael Turner is a dude. He's just not going to get an opportunity with LaDainian Tomlinson. Then he goes to Atlanta, and ironically enough goes to Atlanta and becomes a feature back for multiple seasons, has multiple high-level years. I think Allgeier is on that type of trajectory. I think the Falcons, I mean, they got new GM, new coach. Everything could be different. They could go a different direction, but everything they put out when I was covering them this summer was essentially, we love Tyler Allgeier. We'd love him to stay a Falcon. We don't feel like we could pay him to the level that he deserves to be paid. We don't feel like it's fair to him to keep him around here.
So I missed a few other guys, Jeff, as I was looking that were just like way down on the list when I was looking through projected salary this year. So let me throw a few other guys out there that I think are also interesting to talk about. Kamani Vidal. We talked about Najee Harris a little bit earlier. Kamani Vidal, though, very quickly came to the end of his rookie deal without doing much until this year. Another guy to kind of keep an eye on. I think that he's one of those guys that kind of won over the trust of the coaching staff, because I think going into the year, there was no trust at all. Like, they had Amari Hampton, they had Najee Harris, and they were kind of forced to lean on Kamani Vidal when both of them went down. But then we saw that when Omari and Hampton came back, they still utilized Kamani Vidal. We saw Amari and Hampton wild card game. He was hurt, and they had no problem leaning on Kamani Vidal as well. So I'd expect him to get retained by the Chargers just because of what he did this year. But a name to watch, a more interesting name to discuss, Isaiah Pacheco. Jeff, I don't want to, put a nail in somebody's coffin here, but I think Isaiah Pacheco's days are just done at this point. Like, he was in a best case scenario playing with the Kansas City Chiefs and was losing work to an old injured Kareem Hunt. I'd be shocked at this point if Isaiah Pacheco ever gives us a top 24 season again. Are you kind of there as well?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about your biggest miss. My biggest miss this year was Isaiah Pacheco across the board. Isaiah Pacheco was my biggest miss. I was grabbing him in the 5th and 6th round every single time I could, and I really thought that he would come in, kind of seize this opportunity, knowing that he was headed for free agency, be the lead back for the Chiefs. I don't think we got a single startable week out of Isaiah Pacheco this entire season. If we did, it was because he scored a pointless touchdown. It was just a really disappointing season for Pacheco. And then you head into free agency. Yeah, I mean, nobody's gonna make him their starter. He's gonna be a backup that has to break in his direction.
Yeah, and I'm looking right now. I mean, the best game of the year that we got from Isaiah Pacheco, 12.8 points. He had another game with 12.4 points. Besides that, yeah, like, not even giving us top 40 value. I mean, it was just a tough year for those who drafted Isaiah Pacheco. Another guy worth mentioning, though, Jeff, is Sean Tucker. And this is a guy that we see like every year. Sean Tucker is going to have his big, huge game where he just blows up and then just kind of goes back into waiting until next year. But I think a lot of that was because he was playing on an offense with Bucky Irving and Rashad White. He had good talent ahead of him. This is a guy that I think is kind of getting ignored. I mean, literally, I didn't even have him on the show sheet until I just caught my mistake almost an hour into this show. But Sean Tucker is a guy that has the workhorse build, has the pass catching chops, has the breakaway speed. This is a guy that, dare I say, Javonte Williams-esque, that like if he lands on a team with an opportunity, I think Sean Tucker could be one of the really surprising guys in 2026.
Yeah, he's a restricted free agent, so I do believe that the Buccaneers are going to retain him because we don't usually. It has to be pretty aggressive to get a restricted free agent from somewhere, and running backs teams don't usually go there. But he definitely, I think, could be the big winner for Rashad White's free agency, because if you move Rashad White out of there and he becomes the very clear backup to Bucky Irving that is a very high level player if Bucky Irving's out of the lineup. I don't know what that type of contract would look like in retaining him, because I think that if I were Sean Tucker, I would want to be like, sure, let's year or two to satisfy this restricted free agency, but also
Mhm.
I want to be able to test the market and see what's out there, because he should have been drafted much higher. There were some injury concerns when he was coming out of Syracuse that basically got him taken off of the board for a lot of teams, and he's looked great when given opportunity. He had some massive games this year, and I think that he is definitely a player that, with Rashad White very likely moving on from Tampa Bay, he kind of moves
I just
moves up into being the clear backup.
and you say injury concerns. It wasn't injury concerns, it was a heart condition that they found out about at the combine, so technically
Oh,
injury related, but it was much more than that. I mean, it was congenital heart failure that they were worried about, so, seems like he has been able to overcome that, but yeah, this is a guy who was drawing a lot of day 2 buzz. That condition was found at the combine, and it caused him to fall quite a little bit, but, seems like he has been healthy ever since. Another guy who gets that restricted free agent tag potentially, Jeff, Keaton Mitchell. Do you think that the Ravens, similar to Sean Tucker, try to retain Keaton Mitchell as well? This guy who has flashed in between injuries, and in my mind, like I see an aging Derrick Henry, and I see a very complimentary piece to Derrick Henry. Of course, we have to see who the coach is going to be there next year, but I'd be surprised if they let Keaton Mitchell walk.
yeah, that would be my expectation too. I think they were a little bit more intentional with their usage of Keaton Mitchell towards the end of the year, kind of recognizing to keep Henry fresh, but also to recognize that they do value Keaton Mitchell and it's the perfect role for him to be in outside of him able to handle a larger role. I think that the restricted free agency kind of, I do expect those guys to be sticking around. I know Kamani Vidal, you had mentioned him. He's an exclusive rights free agent. So the Chargers I would expect they're going to retain him. I think we're going to see Emmanuel Wilson's another restricted free agent. Bam
Yeah.
Knight, I mentioned him. He's a restricted free agent. I do think that these restricted free agents will tend to be there, but like we said with Tucker, even if it gets retained, the situation could definitely get better for them. And like Vidal is another example of, if Najee Harris is gone, he's the very clear backup to Mary Hampton. We've seen him have value in that role. Some of these guys gain clarity because of not what happens to them, but what happens around them.
So let's talk about probably the juiciest part of the show, Jeff, because this is just pure speculation on our end. The guys that we think could be potentially released. Now, this first one, I just want to rip the band aid off and talk about this because I don't see it. There has been so much buzz about Alvin Kamara getting released this year. Jeff, if they keep Alvin Kamara on the books, they have to pay him $18.6 million. If they release him, they have to pay him $18.3 million in dead cap. What am I missing here? Like, is this just like a, hey, you've been good to us. We're going to be good to you. We're going to let you hit the market as a free agent. If that's the case, why didn't they release him in season? Why didn't they trade him at the trade deadline? He talked about going to retire if he was traded at the trade deadline. This is one to me. I don't know if they're planning to just release him and then he retires and calls it a day, or if he releases and then he goes and chases a ring somewhere else. But I don't see why the Saints would be willing to eat $18.3 million on Alvin Kamara's deal. Am I missing something here?
No, I don't think so. I think this speaks to me that ownership loves a guy, and they basically kind of, sometimes you do see those situations where a guy is just, he's a saint. We want him to be in the Ring of
Right.
Honor. He's going to break all these records. He's going to be the franchise leader in all these categories. I think from Alvin Kamara's standpoint, he's getting $18 million, and I do tend to agree that if Kamara wanted to be somewhere else, Kamara would be somewhere else. They would have traded him. They would have moved on. And, but that being said, I mean, the Saints won like the 6 of their last 7 or something like
Yeah.
that. And
Without Alvin Kamara.
they finished one game out of first place in their division, even though that My favorite stat that I saw was the Falcons were eliminated from playoff contention on December 7th, and they won their division. That was my favorite stat that I saw. But I think that you're seeing the turnaround in New Orleans, and maybe Alvin Kamara felt that and said, "I want to be a part of that." Maybe that was part of the reason why he didn't move. But I think we definitely are seeing potential turnaround there and feeling good, like feeling like Kellen Moore is the right coach there, feeling like Tyler Shuck might give them an opportunity as a franchise quarterback. I mean, Kamara, you got that money heading towards you, and clearly he wants to be in New Orleans, and that would be my expectation. Unless he's going to, I don't think he's going to retire to leave $18 million on the table, and
Right.
it's not really, the savings isn't really there. And I do think fundamentally the organization wants to do right by Alvin Kamara, and if he wants to be a Saint, doing right by Alvin Kamara is him being a Saint.
And I agree with you. I just felt like it needed to be discussed because, like, if you click on any article about like potential releases, like Alvin Kamara is the top guy on every single list, and everybody's talking about it as if like Alvin Kamara is done with the Saints. And when I look at the contract, I just do not see it that way. And I'm glad you don't either. This is why we agree on so many things. Now, one that I do see as a potential release, and I was talking about this last offseason, looking ahead at James Conner's contract, they owe him $1.25 million if, or I'm sorry, $10.25 million if he returns next year, or they can release him and save $8 million against the cap. Now, one of the reasons I talked about James Conner's contract so much is because I thought last year was going to be the audition for Trey Benson to see, can Trey Benson, this guy that we drafted in round 3, can he be the guy to handle this workload in the post James Conner era? He just got hurt all year. So I think they don't have any clearer picture on who Trey Benson is than the day they drafted him 2 years ago. So that to me makes me think that maybe they bring James Conner back in, but now with a new coaching staff, we don't know if the new coaching staff is going to value James Conner the same way that Jonathan Gannon did. So to me, this one makes way too much sense for the Cardinals to just save that $8 million and move on from James Conner this offseason.
Yeah, and if they are, you're exactly right. And you make a good point there talking about Trey Benson, because Trey Benson didn't exactly light the world on fire as a rookie. He had some pretty significant concerns coming into his second season. Then to get a completely lost season, this would be easy. Like, had you seen Trey Benson go out there and just smash when James Conner had season-ending injury, then you'd move on from Conner. You wouldn't think twice about it, and that's the planning around the way that they constructed this. But now you're looking at it as everything has gone sideways. They've fired their coach. They don't know who the coach is going to be. They're going to have to make that move, and then the Kyler Murray of it all. And we have seen teams move off of massive quarterback salaries when it's apparent that that's not going to work. But it also does require some cap maneuverability and some cap gymnastics. And if you've got this running back here and you're hitting the reset button with a 30-year-old running back, then part of that moving some salary in order to accommodate getting Kyler Murray off your roster would involve releasing James Conner. And maybe that's, again, I think it's the type of thing wanting to do right by Conner. I think Conner has ingrained himself as a team leader. The team appreciates him. He's a great story, overcoming cancer to become a starting feature NFL running back. It's a pretty good story. And I think that looking at it and doing right and saying we're going to enter a rebuilding phase here, and we'll let you go somewhere else, James. And so I think that Conner is really the under the radar option for a lot of teams.
And I think that, yeah, he's probably going to end up getting released just for what you said. You know, this is going to be a full blown rebuild for the Arizona Cardinals. They're going to try to shed as much money off the cap as they can so they can just kind of rebuild things out there. Another player that has a very similar contract to James Conner is Aaron Jones. If the Minnesota Vikings choose to retain Aaron Jones next year, they owe him $14.8 million. They can save $8 million, the same exact number that the Cardinals could save by James Conner if they release Aaron Jones. So to me, like, we know Aaron Jones is a very good running back. He has looked good in Minnesota for the last couple of years, but getting up there in age, I think there's a lot of question marks around the future of this team. This is another one to me. Like, I just can't imagine the Vikings, given the state of their team right now, bringing back a 32-year-old Aaron Jones to play on a $15 million deal. This to me, I think it's just like, I think they set this contract up with the intention of not having Aaron Jones be a part of the 2026 plans.
Do you know how much salary cap space the Vikings have?
Not a lot, right?
Negative $43 million.
Yeah, yeah, not a lot. Yeah, not a lot at all. So, I mean, they can cut Aaron Jones and still be upside down $30 million.
Yeah, they're good. They're gonna have to make some decisions with some veterans, and Aaron Jones is probably one of those veterans.
Yeah. So I think that one is as simple as that, and we hope Aaron Jones. I want to see this man. Just he's still fun. He still looks great when he's out there. Go sign with a contender and get you a ring, Aaron Jones. Well, he's got one ring. I spoke to no, I don't think he wasn't on that Packers team. That was pre Aaron Jones. Yeah, Aaron Jones doesn't have a ring, right? I
I,
should know this.
the Packers feel
Feels
like they
really
won
good.
the Super Bowl like 6 years ago, but also 26 years ago. It was like,
I, I think those were the last two that they won, 6 and 26 years ago. Tony Pollard, another player that it just makes sense fiscally to think about letting Tony Pollard go. If they keep him on the books, they owe him $9.25 million. If they release him, they eat $2 million in cap, saving $7.25 million. So to me, Jeff, when I look at a contract like that, seeing a guy at age 29, where they can basically just shed his contract for close to nothing in dead money. This is another one to me. Tony Pollard feels all but gone as a Tennessee Titan, which Tajay Spears could be the guy. But also, we've talked about all of these free agents. We haven't even mentioned the rookies coming in yet this year. As excited as we are about Tajay Spears, this is a team that could very easily go out and make a splashy play for a Kenneth Walker or somebody else and bring somebody else in, because I don't know if you want to trust Tajay Spears, given that he doesn't have an ACL. I don't know if you want to trust him to be the guy getting 25 plus touches per game.
the Vikings had negative $43 million. The Titans have $96 million in cap space. They have the second
Yep.
most cap space behind just the Chargers. You're looking at it, putting
They're also
pieces
probably releasing
around.
Calvin Ridley. We're
Yeah,
only talking about running backs on this show, but they're going to shed some money getting rid of Calvin Ridley as well. So by the time free agency actually hits, the Titans might have like 120 plus $1 million to play with.
Yeah, and you're looking at it as, I mean, as a Bears fan, what happened after Caleb Williams' rookie year? They go out and they continue to pour resources and pieces in there, and they were more aggressive because they saw Justin Fields fail, and so they went out before they had Caleb Williams and make sure that there were pieces there so that they wouldn't have that all over again. I think when you're seeing Cam Ward, he's definitely shown flashes, and he showed a lot better flashes down the stretch than where he was at the middle of the year or when Brian Callahan was the coach. I mean, everything about the Titans this offseason needs to be putting pieces around Cam Ward to allow him to succeed. The offensive line should be better than what it was last year. They had, I mean, maybe some of that is you fire the offensive lineman's coach, that the historic Hall of Fame potentially offensive lineman coordinator's son was the head coach. So you get rid of Brian Callahan, you use Bill Callahan probably as well. But that offensive line was a lot worse than the pieces suggest it should be. I think they'll get that righted. I expect they go out and aggressively add some talent in different directions, and an upgraded Tony Pollard might very well be that. Tony Pollard, the contract that fantasy Twitter knows better than anybody because it is loaded with incentives.
And we saw not just the Chicago Bears, but I flash back 2 years ago. The Panthers did the same thing too with Bryce Young. Like they just went out and they just splashed a ton of money to beef up that interior
Yep.
offensive line. We saw the Denver Broncos do that with Bo Nix. We saw the Bears do that with Caleb Williams. That seems to be the recipe that teams are following now to help get the best play out of a young quarterback. So they already have some pretty nice pieces in Tennessee with Skaronsi and Latham, and Cushenberry's been okay as well. But they go, they're two offensive linemen away from having a really good unit there. So I think they'll probably spend some money there, maybe with running back, with having some extra money to spend as well. But they will definitely be opening up quite a bit of salary cap, releasing Tony Pollard and probably Calvin Ridley as well. David Montgomery is another one to talk about, Jeff. Not a ton of cap savings here. They'd save about $3.5 million. He's on the books for $8.3 million next year. But this just seems like one where David Montgomery hasn't been happy, and he's been a little bit outspoken about some of his frustrations. Jahmyr Gibbs continues to carve out a bigger and bigger workload every single year. To me, this just feels like a, hey, go test the market. We don't have the role that you want anymore. Financially, I don't think that the Lions should cut David Montgomery, but a lot of buzz we're getting out of Detroit is that his days there are done.
Yeah, and I speculated about that in the middle of the season because you look at it and the way that they were utilizing him was dramatically different than the way they had been utilizing him in the past. And it was obvious that Jahmyr Gibbs had elevated and taken over as the feature back, as an elite level talent there. When we talk about a guy like Najee Harris, maybe that's a good landing spot for him. But to make that move on David Montgomery, basically, I think it would be the Bears acknowledging, hey, you're not happy. We want you to be happy, and as
The
part of
Lions.
that, or the Lions, yes, the Lions, acknowledging, maybe it's best for you to find somewhere else that you can flourish, and you get your money and do that. That I think that is where my mind landed middle of the year on Montgomery,
Mhm.
and that's yeah, it wasn't nearly what we thought it potentially could be or what it had been in the past, where you're getting a running back one, even with Gibbs in the lineup. That offense had shifted dramatically.
Another guy who I would say is as good as gone from his team, Jeff, Devin Singletary, $6.5 million on the books for next year. They can save 5.25 million by releasing him. So this is another one of those, basically just a void year. Like, he is technically on the books, but this was structured with the intent that he would be released. Now with Brian Dable gone as well, we know Brian Dable and Devin Singletary, they've got that connection dating back to their time together in Buffalo. I didn't misspeak, did I? Brian Dable did get fired, right?
Yes.
All right, I thought so. There's so much to keep track of this time of year. Yes, so no Brian Dable. I expect Devin Singletary to be. You can add whatever you want to this one, but Tyrone Tracy, wheels up until they draft or sign somebody else is going to be the kind of narrative out of the Giants, right?
Well, I mean, Scatterbo's going to be back, right? I mean, we think.
I don't know if he'll be 100% for week one. I know the expectation is it'll be ready for week one. Talking to some injury guys, I don't think that's the case. This is a pretty devastating injury. And, we've seen other players miss the next year after this injury. So I know the immediate expectation, Jeff, you know how this goes, right? Like, a player gets injured and they say, hey, all great news. The surgery went off without a hitch. He's going to be back way ahead of schedule. And then you fast forward 9 months and it's like, actually, we also had to do this and this and this and this, and we hope we'll be back in 6 months. I don't know the exact timeline for Cam Scatterbo, but I don't think that Cam Scatterbo is going to be on the field week one looking like the player he was last year.
My best ball rosters definitely know how this goes, because I'm the guy in. I can't believe these people are letting me get Brandon Ayuk in the 8th round every single time. I can
Mm.
just take him in the 8th round, and it's yeah, 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 yeah. I
Brandon Ayuk
definitely
was an easy click in Dynasty startups last year. Yeah.
definitely get a little bit of a window. Like, I mean, it's going to be a healthy week. What are you talking about? We had 9 months off. Everybody's fine over 9 months.
Uh-huh.
But
And you never get that news until like the second week of training
oh yeah,
camp. Like,
oh yeah.
after you've already done thousands of dollars worth of best ball drafts, then you get that news that, oh, by
Uh,
the way, he also,
yeah,
his LCL, his MCL, his meniscus, those were all compromised too. And we
yeah.
hope he can return this year.
Before August, everything is ahead of schedule. Everybody looks great. Everything's good. We even saw him running. We saw him taking a chair shot on the WWE. He's good to
Oh,
go.
do you remember the Brandon Ayuk? Look at Brandon Ayuk. He's golfing and
Yeah.
he has a knee sleeve on and he looks good. And yeah, how funny that looks now. Last guy I want to talk about though, Jeff, and this is a weird one. I haven't seen anybody really talking about a DeAndre Swift release, but this is another one. When you look at the contract, if they keep him around next year, they have to pay him $8.3 million. They can save $7 million if they release him. Now, hands up, I was one of the biggest DeAndre Swift, I don't want to say haters. What's like a term for somebody, I don't know, doubter? Like, I always had issues with how DeAndre Swift ran the football. Like, he just didn't get downfield quick enough. There was a lot of east-west movement, a lot of dancing around, and it ended up turning into a lot of big losses. That has not been the case this year. DeAndre Swift is running like a completely different running back than he has for the entire start of his career. Like, he's running aggressive, he's finishing runs, he's accelerating through contact. He is, way more decisive in getting downfield. So all of the issues I had with DeAndre Swift, even as soon or like as recent as 2024 in Chicago, I wasn't seeing that as much in 2025, but I do see $7 million in potential savings. Now, the Bears aren't strapped for cash by any means. They could afford to bring him back, but all of the names that we have talked about, there are some big name players that are going to be available in free agency this year. I think if they can save $7 million by releasing DeAndre Swift and use that money potentially on a Breece Hall or a Kenneth Walker or somebody like that, we saw a good backfield in Detroit with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. And what did they do the next year? They went out and they spent money on David Montgomery and they spent a top 10 draft pick on Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that's what this Ben Johnson led Bears offense really wants, is not two above average running backs. They want two game changing running backs. And I don't think DeAndre Swift is that.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get Jahmyr Gibbs if you're picking like 30th or 31st, Dave. So
Right. But you
keep winning
can
games.
get Kenneth Walker, who maybe a discount Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah. But I think I just think overall the dynasty community is pretty sharp, and so people know who's going to be pending free agent, and I think that this show is probably bumping up towards the end of actually being able to get value on some of these guys. Had you been able to do this in like week 11, you probably would have been a lot of value that you could potentially reap. I know last year I was grabbing Javonte Williams everywhere I possibly could towards the end of the season when he would look like he was dead in Denver. That being said, your league might be different. And so you can go out and try to target some of these guys. And maybe you don't go intentionally at Tyler Allgeier, but maybe you try to craft a larger offer and Tyler Allgeier is thrown in there, or a guy like Sean Tucker, something like that, because I do think that we're going to have, in my mind, at least from what I've seen, the dynasty community, there will be plugged in and we'll be looking for the next Javonte Williams and all these speculation about these free agents. And then the moment that the rookies really start to roll and you start to get through the Senior Bowl and the Combine, the free agents are going to be old hat at that point, and you'll be able to get some good value again on some veteran free agents here. But right now it's a little bit of Schrodinger's cat, where every one of these backs is both alive and dead. That every one of these guys could be the potential lead running back for the 2026 Dallas Cowboys, and every single one of these guys could be buried on a depth chart. So keep in mind that as you go out, but you recognize that there is good volatility here and there is good opportunity. And if we miss somebody, please just let us know.
And you know who is going to be the future Dallas Cowboys running back for 2026? The guy that I'm trying to trade to you. And you know who's just getting buried on a depth chart? The guy that I'm trying to get from you in a trade, because that's just how this works. My players are all going to land in the best spots. Your players are all going to fall apart. And we should try to make a deal for those guys before that inevitably happens. Jeff, this was probably the longest of these positional previews episodes that we will do, but as always, it is the craziest, most volatile position. Running backs get moved all over the place. It feels like every season they just throw like 50 running backs in a cup, shake them all up, pour them out on the table, and Yahtzee, we figure out where everybody goes. So it will be a very fun offseason. We've got the rookies coming in as well. We will be back next week to talk about some wide receivers to be paying attention to, just like we did today. Pending free agents, restricted free agents, potential cap casualties, and much more. So if you made it through the end of the show, please help us out. Like the video, subscribe on YouTube. And if you're listening on podcasts, leave us a review to help the show grow. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. The show wouldn't be possible without you taking the time to listen. Thank you, and we will see you next week.